Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are digging into a question that is so fundamental, so deeply woven into the fabric of our lives that we almost never stop to actually question it.
We just take the answer for granted.
Exactly. I mean, think for a moment about your last few decisions. You chose to start listening to this deep dive. Right now, you might be thinking about what you'll have for lunch. Or maybe you're wrestling with a really complex decision at work.
And in every single one of those moments, you have this profound, undeniable feeling that you are the author of those choices.
Right. When you choose coffee over tea, you feel deep in your bones that you genuinely could have chosen the tea.
It's more than just a feeling, isn't it? It's sort of the cornerstone of our whole identity. We feel like the captain of our own ship.
Absolutely. But here's the massive world-altering conflict we're getting into today. What if that feeling, that sense of authorship, is just a really sophisticated illusion? An internal user interface designed by forces you had no say in.
You mean forces like your genetics, your upbringing, the culture you were born into?
Or even the specific firing of neurons in your brain, second by second, or maybe a divine preordained plan. What if all of that was quietly scripting every single moment of your life?
It's that ancient tension between destiny and effort. If everything is inevitable, why even bother trying?
But on the other hand, if we are truly free, how do we fit into a universe that seems to be governed by these really strict, predictable physical laws?
That is the mission for this deep dive. Are we truly free, or are our lives determined by fate, nature, or God? We're going to be looking at sources from philosophy, religion, psychology, even modern neuroscience to unpack this.
And it matters, right? The answer fundamentally changes how you view everything. Responsibility, the legal system, success, failure, the very meaning you give to your own struggle.
For sure. But before we jump in, we have to get the terms right. We need to lay down some precise definitions because words like determinism and free will, they get thrown around a lot, often mixed up with fate or luck.
Okay, good call. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. What are the two foundational terms we absolutely need to get this?
First up is determinism. At its core, this is the idea of universal causation. It suggests that every single event, and that includes every human thought and choice, is the necessary result of causes that came before it.
So, given the exact state of the universe at one moment, plus all the laws of nature,
One future is possible. It's locked in.
so the universe is like a giant clockwork mechanism. If you knew the position of every gear, you could predict its future forever.
Precisely. And the classic thought experiment for this is the rewind and replay test. Imagine you made a choice this morning. Say you chose a red shirt.
Okay.
If you could rewind the entire universe back to the exact moment before that choice, and I mean exact, every neuron firing the same way, every memory, every hormone.
Every subatomic particle in the same place.
Yes. A hard determinist would say you would inevitably choose the red shirt again. Every single time. There is zero possibility you could choose the blue one.
So choice is just a complex physical reaction. It completely removes chance from the equation.
It does. And standing in complete opposition to that is, of course, free will. In its strongest, purest form, this is the idea that at least sometimes you genuinely could have done otherwise.
Meaning your decisions aren't just the inevitable result of all those physical forces.
Right. You, the conscious agent, have the power to introduce something new into the causal chain. You can select between what are truly open possibilities.
So if we ran that rewind and replay test with the red shirt,
A person with genuine free will might choose the blue shirt this time. Or the red one again. The point is, the choice isn't dictated solely by the prior physical state of the universe.
got it. Okay, so we have two concepts that seem completely incompatible.
They certainly seem to be. And now we can see how different philosophical schools try to either champion one, get rid of the other, or find some way for them to coexist.
All right, let's unpack this and map out the terrain, starting with the most stark and uncompromising position, which basically throws our whole idea of freedom right out the window. Okay, so we'll start with hard determinism. This is the position that really leans into the science, looks at that definition of determinism, every event has a cause, and just concludes that our gut feeling of being free is a mistake, a big one.
A profound mistake. Hard determinism accepts that idea of universal causation, and from there, it delivers a really devastating verdict on our everyday assumptions. Genuine free will does not exist, period.
The core idea being that every choice you feel you're making is just the final link in this long, long chain of causes that stretches back to before you were even
A
born.
chain of causes you never chose, right?
Right. I didn't choose my genes, my parents, the culture I grew up in.
Exactly. You didn't choose your genetics, your early environment, your parents' economic status, any of it. And since you didn't choose the causes, and those causes necessitate the effect, which is your choice, then you never really could have chosen otherwise.
The logic is kind of relentless, isn't it?
It is. If you choose chocolate ice cream over vanilla, that choice is determined by the state of your brain right now, which was determined by your habits, which were determined by past experiences. And you can follow that chain all the way back.
So that powerful, immediate feeling of, I am choosing this, on this view, it's just a trick. It's an illusion of authorship that my consciousness applies to an event that was always going to happen anyway.
It's very compelling if, well, deeply uncomfortable conclusion.
Yeah.
And the immediate challenge, as you can imagine, is what this does to morality and the law.
Oh, for sure. If I'm just the vehicle for these determined causes, how can you hold me responsible for my actions?
This is where it seems to just dismantle our entire ethical foundation. If someone commits a crime, it feels totally unfair to punish them for something they were physically necessitated to do.
But hard determinists aren't saying we should just open all the prisons, are they?
No, not at all. That's a common misunderstanding. They argue we still need laws, we still need prisons, we still need praise and blame, but we have to radically change what we think their function is.
Okay, so how does their function change?
They stop being about retribution. The idea that someone deserves to suffer for a bad choice, that's gone. Instead, they become purely pragmatic tools for shaping future behavior, for consequentialism.
So we're not punishing a bank robber because he chose to be evil.
We're locking him up because that's a necessary cause that we hope produces a good future effect, like deterring others, or just keeping the public safe, or maybe rehabilitation, giving him a new set of environmental inputs that will deterministically shape his future choices for the better.
So punishment shifts from being about moral justice to being about public safety and efficiency.
Exactly. A hard determinist sees a dangerous criminal as a complex but malfunctioning machine, one that needs to be either repaired or safely contained, not a guilty soul who deserves to suffer.
And modern neuroscience has really given this camp a lot of ammunition, right? With those famous experiments that seem to show the brain making decisions before we're even aware of them.
Absolutely. The foundational one everyone points to is the Libet experiment from the 80s and all of its modern successors. In these studies, they have people do something simple, like flex their wrist and report the exact moment on a clock when they consciously decided to do it.
And what did they find?
They found a buildup of brain activity, they call it the readiness potential, that showed the action was coming sometimes a full second before the person said they made the decision.
A full second is a long time in brain
A
time.
very long time. And later studies using fMRI claimed they could detect which button a person would press up to 7, even 10 seconds before the person was consciously aware of their own choice.
7 seconds. That's incredible. It really strengthens the idea that consciousness is just showing up late to the party. The brain has already started the process, and our conscious mind just swoops in and says, yep, I did that. That was me.
It supports this idea of the self as a narrator, a storyteller just making sense of things after the fact, even though all the heavy lifting was done by unconscious, determined neural processes. It makes the whole hard determinist position feel incredibly rigorous and a little chilling.
Okay, that's a really deep dive into that side. Now let's pivot completely to the other end of the spectrum. The view that says our freedom is absolutely real, even if we can't quite fit it into our understanding of physics. Let's talk about libertarian free will.
Right, so this is the position that lines up with our gut feeling and with many religious traditions. It says we have genuine, deep freedom. When we make a choice, we're choosing between truly open alternatives, and that choice is not fully determined by what came before.
So the libertarian would say that the rewind and replay test is just wrong. Even if you reset the universe perfectly, the agent, the person, could still choose differently.
Exactly. The key concept here is agent causation. The idea is that the self, the agent, is the true origin of an action. It's a new starting point.
So when I choose to be kind instead of selfish, it's not just my biology getting the credit, it's me.
Yes, you as a self-determining being started a new causal chain. It wasn't just the inevitable result of prior physical events.
But this is where we hit that big wall, isn't it? How does this kind of freedom fit into a physical universe? It starts to sound a bit like magic, Where does this mysterious agent step in and override the laws of physics governing my neurons?
And that's the central challenge for this view, for sure. Libertarian philosophers have tried to answer this. They argue it's not random, but a special kind of power. The agent isn't just a domino getting hit by other dominoes. The agent is a hand that can choose to start a new line of dominoes falling.
So the agent is its own cause, an uncaused cause.
Essentially, yes. They're arguing that the self isn't just a collection of physical events, but something that stands, in a way, outside that system, able to act freely upon it.
That sounds a lot like dualism, though, the idea that the mind or soul is separate from the physical brain. You almost need that separation to make room for this kind of freedom.
That is the most common metaphysical route they take. But some libertarians try for a more scientific explanation, and they often point to quantum indeterminacy.
The argument that because the universe is a bit fuzzy and probabilistic at the subatomic level, that maybe that's where free will slips in.
That's the idea. Maybe the randomness of quantum mechanics creates some wiggle room in the brain's processes, breaking the deterministic chain. But critics jump on this immediately for two big reasons.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, randomness isn't freedom. If my choice is just the result of a random quantum event in my brain, that's not something I controlled. It's just chance. It doesn't give me moral responsibility.
Good point. And the second issue?
It's the problem of scale. The randomness at the quantum level is tiny. Most physicists believe it averages out and becomes negligible at the macro level of something like a neuron, let alone a human brain. It's hard to see how a little subatomic jitter translates into a complex moral decision.
Okay, so we have hard determinism saying freedom is an illusion, and libertarianism struggling to explain how its freedom works. This brings us to the middle ground, the position most philosophers seem to land on. Compatibilism.
The great diplomatic effort. Compatibilism says, hold on, maybe free will and determinism aren't enemies. They can both be true at the same time. They're compatible.
How on earth do they manage that? It seems like a direct contradiction.
They do it by performing a very clever and very crucial maneuver. They redefine what free will actually means.
Okay, so they're not talking about the deep metaphysical could have done otherwise.
Exactly. They say that's the wrong definition. For compatibilists, freedom is simply acting according to your own internal desires and character without being forced by something external.
Can you give us an example?
The classic one is this. If someone puts a gun to your head and says, steal that car, you're not acting freely. Your action is caused by external coercion.
Yeah.
The gun. But if you decide to buy a car, even if your desire for that specific car was completely predetermined by your personality and the ads you've seen, you are acting freely. Because the action flowed from your internal motivations. It's what you wanted to do.
I see. So they embrace determinism. They're fine with the idea that your desires were caused, but they save responsibility because the action came from you, from who you are.
Precisely. As long as the action flows from your character, we have enough to assign praise and blame. And you can see the appeal, right? It lets us have our scientific, law-governed universe, but we also get to keep our courts and our ethics.
It does sound like the perfect compromise, but there has to be a catch. What's the big critique of compatibilism?
The critique is devastating, and it's why opponents sometimes call it freedom inside the cage.
Freedom inside the cage. I like that.
It gets the point across. The argument is, if your character, your desires, your entire decision-making mechanism was programmed into you by your genes and your environment, is acting on those desires really freedom?
It's like you're free to drive the car, but you're on a track that was laid down for you long ago. You can steer, but you can't choose the destination.
That's the perfect analogy. The action flows from your desires, sure, but who chose the desires? If you were determined to want X, then doing X is a very shallow kind of freedom.
So the whole debate is really complex. Now that we have these three camps sorted out, hard determinism, libertarianism, and compatibilism, let's zoom out. Because this isn't just a modern Western philosophical problem, this is a universal human question. #tag2, the influence of fate, destiny, and divine plans. It seems like every culture has wrestled with this tension. Let's shift a bit to these broader frameworks of fate, destiny, and divine plans.
This takes us into a slightly different kind of necessity. Ancient concepts of fate often portray human freedom as being, well, overshadowed by this huge, inescapable cosmic pattern.
And this pattern is usually impersonal, right? It's not really about good or evil.
That's a great way to put it. It's more about structural necessity. Think of the ancient Greeks and the Moirai, the three fates. You had Clotho, who spun the thread of life, Lachesis, who measured it, and Atropos, who cut it.
And the gods couldn't interfere with them, right?
They couldn't. Even Zeus had to respect their decrees. This shows that even the most powerful beings were subject to a higher predetermined order. It removes the idea of ultimate control from everyone.
That's a pretty staggering idea. We see a similar thing in Norse mythology with the Norns, who carved destiny into the roots of the world tree.
And the theme is always the same, and it's always tragic. The more you try to run from your destiny, the faster you run right into it. The classic example is Oedipus.
Right. The prophecy said he'd kill his father and marry his mother. He does everything he can to avoid it, leaves his home.
And every single choice he makes to escape his fate is the very step that leads him to fulfill it. His personal, operational freedom only serves the larger, necessary pattern of the prophecy.
So you're free to struggle, but the overall story is already written.
The endpoints are set. Now, this whole idea changes dramatically when that overarching power isn't some impersonal force, but a conscious, moral, all-powerful God.
And that's where the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam introduce this really sharp paradox.
The tension is immense. On one hand, God is omniscient, meaning God knows everything, and sovereign, meaning God is in ultimate control. But on the other hand, humans are constantly commanded to make free choices, to obey, to repent, to love.
So if God has a master plan and already knows exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow, how can I be genuinely responsible for that choice? This has been the source of centuries of debate.
It has. You see different theological approaches. Some emphasize divine predestination, like in some Calvinist traditions. This is basically theological determinism. God's eternal will determines everything, including who is saved.
Which provides a lot of comfort about God's power, but seems to come at the cost of human free will.
It does. Then you have the counterposition, which emphasizes human choice. It suggests that God's knowledge is more passive. God knows you'll choose coffee, but that knowledge doesn't cause you to choose it. You're still the one making the choice.
But that leads back to that classic puzzle. If God knows with 100% certainty that I will sin tomorrow, can I actually do otherwise?
If you can't, you're not free.
And if I can, then God's infallible knowledge was fallible, which can't be.
It's a real brain twister. The most influential attempt to solve this comes from thinkers like Augustine and Boethius. Their solution is to say that God exists outside of time.
Okay, what does that mean, outside of time? Our brains are so linear.
For us, time is a straight line, past, present, future. But for God, on this view, all moments of time are experienced simultaneously in an eternal present. Think of it like watching a movie. You've seen it before, so you know what happens at the end, but your knowledge doesn't force the characters on the screen to say their lines.
So God isn't foreseeing my choice. God is just seeing my choice as it happens in God's eternal now.
Precisely. God's knowledge is timeless, not causing things in time. So when you make your free choice tomorrow, in your timeline, God is simply observing it. This is the metaphysical tightrope they walk to try and preserve both God's total knowledge and our meaningful agency.
That's a fascinating framework. Now let's shift gears and look at how this plays out in Indian traditions, specifically with the idea of karma.
Karma is a really sophisticated system that offers a kind of synthesis. The idea is that your present situation, your health, your wealth, your suffering, is strongly shaped by the moral quality of your past actions, maybe even from previous lives.
So there's a strong element of determinism there. My current circumstances are the determined result of past actions.
They are powerful conditioning, yes.
Okay.
But, and this is the crucial part, karma is not fatalism. It's not pure determinism. Your past actions determine your circumstances, the cage you're born into. But every system emphasizes that you still have current agency.
So your present choices create new karma, which will shape your future.
Exactly. Yeah. The past loads the gun, but you pull the trigger now, and that sets up the next situation. It's this dynamic web. You're not a helpless puppet, but you're not a total master of your destiny either.
And the Buddhist perspective really zeroes in on this, right?
It does. Buddhism rejects the idea of a permanent, unchanging self. It sees you as this continuous stream of cause and effect. Because of that, there's a huge capacity for change. Liberation, or nirvana, isn't about waiting for fate to be kind. It's about actively transforming your own mind.
And the key to that is intention. I think the word is satana.
Satana is the pivot point. The Buddha said that intention is karma. It's the mental state, the volition behind an act that generates the karmic force. Accidentally causing harm has a much smaller karmic result than intentionally planning to cause harm.
So the system constantly reinforces the idea that your conscious, mindful choice is the most powerful thing there is. It's what creates your future reality.
Which makes it a profound system of agency, not passive resignation. Your past provides the context, but your present intention provides the path to freedom. Okay, so we've covered the philosophical arguments and the spiritual frameworks. Now we have to turn to the lab, to neuroscience. Because science brings hard data to the table that seems to directly challenge our everyday experience of free will.
This is where the abstract arguments get very real, with brain scanners and electrodes. Is the brain just an elaborate machine, or can we find that spark of an independent agent?
Well, as we touched on earlier, the key findings really revolve around the timing of our actions. The work of Benjamin Libet and later more advanced studies provide this really compelling data that the brain starts an action before the conscious mind even knows a decision has been made.
Let's go back to that time lag because it's so important. If the readiness potential, that neural activity, happens hundreds of milliseconds before I'm aware of my choice to press a button, the feeling of choice just seems like an afterthought.
The hard determinist argument that comes from this is very persuasive. If the neural events that cause my decision are happening unconsciously, based on prior physical inputs, then consciousness is just a monitor. It's just confirming the action after the fact.
It makes the me who thinks they're choosing seem like a passenger, just observing what the machinery of the brain was going to do anyway.
And it suggests the self is this fantastic storyteller, creating a coherent narrative of, I chose this, to make sense of the world, even if the choice was actually caused by unconscious biases or environmental priming.
But hold on. All of these experiments, they seem to be about very simple, almost meaningless actions. Flex your wrist, press a button. That feels a world away from a complex moral choice.
And that is the absolute core of the counter-argument. Critics say these findings simply don't scale up.
What do they mean by that? Why wouldn't it scale up from choosing a button to, say, choosing a career?
Well, first, the decisions in the lab are arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason to press the left button over the right. But when I spend a year deciding whether to move to a new city, that decision involves conscious, long-term reflection on my values, my family, my future.
So that long process of conscious deliberation is a massive causal input in itself.
A huge input. It's not just a twitch. Yeah. And second, critics offer other interpretations of that readiness potential. Some argue it's not the brain making the decision, but just the brain generally getting ready for a possible movement.
Ah, so it's like the brain is warming up the engine, but the conscious mind still has to press the accelerator or the brake.
Exactly. Libet himself suggested this. He said that even if the impulse to act is determined, the conscious mind might have a free veto, the power to say no to an impulse the brain has already started.
So free will isn't about the power to start an action, but maybe the power to stop one.
That's the idea. It shifts the focus. So the big question science leaves us with is one of scale. How much of our life is written by these deep, unconscious brain processes, and how much is authored by our conscious, long-term, reflective self?
It seems like we can't just dismiss that conscious reflection as a complete illusion.
No. It's a reality of our experience that's very difficult to reduce to simple physics, even with these fascinating experiments.
All right, this is the part of the deep dive where we bring it all home. We move from the theoretical to the practical, because what you believe about free will changes everything about how you live and how we structure our society. This is where it gets really interesting.
And the most immediate, most obvious impact is on moral responsibility and law. Most legal systems, especially in the West, operate on a basically libertarian assumption.
The assumption that the individual chose freely and therefore they are responsible.
And because they are responsible, they deserve punishment. The goal is retribution.
Yeah.
You made an evil choice, so you deserve the consequences.
But if you adopt a hard determinist view,
The whole system has to change. If a criminal act was the inevitable result of a person's genes, their childhood trauma, their environment, then the very concept of evil starts to dissolve.
we stop asking, does this person deserve to suffer? And we start asking.
What's the most effective way to solve this causal problem? The focus shifts completely from retribution to consequentialism. What will produce the best future outcome?
So the justice system becomes about public safety, prevention, and rehabilitation. We'd treat criminals more like patients or malfunctioning machines that need fixing.
Exactly. And you can see why this debate is so charged. It forces this massive rethink of things like blame and justice. It could lead to a more humane system, but maybe one that's less emotionally satisfying for victims of crime.
Absolutely. And beyond the courts, this whole question has a huge impact on our spiritual life and self-understanding. This is where it gets really personal.
Think about it. What does repentance or conversion mean if it was all programmed to happen? If finding faith or turning your life around was just another determined event, does that moment lose some of its meaning?
It definitely challenges the idea of earning salvation or merit.
It does. But even in a deterministic framework, the spiritual practices are still necessary. They just become the causes that are required to produce the desired effect, like inner peace or liberation. The striving is still part of the mechanism.
And on a day-to-day psychological level, this changes how we see our own life story.
Oh, completely. It can be the source of incredible relief or immense motivation, depending on how you live
That
life,
some people find real comfort in determinism.
for sure. The idea that it couldn't have been otherwise can be incredibly freeing. It allows you to let go of that crushing guilt over past mistakes.
Mm.
If you were determined to act that way, then blaming yourself is irrational. You can just focus on changing the conditions for the future.
But on the flip side, believing in freedom is what powers so much of our drive to improve.
It's the engine of change, the belief that my choices are real, so my effort matters. That's what fuels therapy, education, everything. If you genuinely believe you're fated to fail, why would you even try?
Which brings us back to that messy, but maybe most honest middle ground of compatibilism.
Right. It sort of acknowledges the truth of both sides. I am deeply shaped by my biology and my past. I didn't choose the hand I was dealt, but I also experience myself right now as being able to reflect and plan and change.
And maybe that's the most crucial point. Regardless of which theory is technically correct, our sources suggest that the belief in free will is a prerequisite for a functioning human society.
It seems to be ethics, law, education, therapy. They are all built on the working assumption that people can reflect, learn, and choose a better path tomorrow than the one they chose today.
So we're almost forced to live as if we are free, no matter what the ultimate reality is.
A therapist can't help a client who they believe is incapable of choosing to change. A society can't function without a concept of responsibility. The commitment to agency is universal and necessary, even if we can't perfectly explain its mechanism.
Wow. We have covered a huge amount of ground here, from the physics of causality all the way to the spiritual idea of Satana. We started by defining those key terms, determinism on one side and free will on the other.
Then we mapped out the philosophical terrain, the bleak but rigorous view of hard determinism, the intuitive but metaphysically tricky claims of libertarianism, and that diplomatic middle ground of compatibilism.
We looked at how different cultures have wrestled with this, from the impersonal fate of the ancient Greeks to the divine paradoxes and Abrahamic traditions, and the dynamic system of karma where intention is key.
And finally, we looked at the modern challenge from neuroscience, which suggests our brains act before we're consciously aware. But we noted that those simple experiments might not tell the whole story about complex, long-term deliberation.
And all of it matters because our answer shapes our legal system, our spiritual lives, and whether we find crippling guilt or empowering purpose in our own choices.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to take with you. Given all the evidence for how much we are shaped by our genes, our environment, our unconscious brain, we are undeniably influenced by forces beyond our control.
And yet,
The experience of genuine responsibility, the commitment to trying to be better, is universal and necessary for society to even work.
so here is the question to ask yourself. If our choices are ultimately determined, why is the belief in free will so powerful, so persistent, and so essential? Is this belief just a beneficial illusion, a useful fiction created by the determined system to keep itself running smoothly?
Or is it possible that this persistent, necessary, universal experience of freedom is itself the strongest evidence we have that our scientific and philosophical models of the universe are still missing something fundamental?
A fascinating paradox to chew on. Is the experience of freedom just a determined outcome of evolution? We'll leave that for you to decide. Or perhaps for the universe to decide for you. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.